From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers and top editor. I'm happy to have you here. In 1989, John Woo's The Killer was a shot heard around the world when it came to changing the face of action cinema. Hong Kong crime cinema's distinctive mix of rhythmic gunplay and operatic drama was sung by the action maestro in a jaw-dropping way that soon took him to Hollywood with the likes of Hard Target, Broken Arrow, Face Off, and Gemini Man. But the language-free movie that broke the mold even for John Woo was Silent Night, a tale of wordless vengeance that served to be a fortuitous teaming for composer Marco Beltrami and editor ZACH Steinberg. With the story's conceit making music and cutting even more important for impactful storytelling, the Oscar-nominated composer of 3:10 to Yuma and The Hurt Locker, along with Buck Sanders, had a blast with The Matrix's Oscar-winning editor for an explosively creative bond, one that now goes back to Woo's beginning with The Killer. But instead of a guilt-drenched male assassin and a dead-serious cop ripping apart Hong Kong, Woo takes a way lighter and more offbeat approach for this deliciously over-the-top reboot that turns the assassin into a crossword-obsessed queen of death who crosses genial pistols with a humorously determined cop, with the apple of both frenemies' eyes, an accidentally blinded singer. With Steinberg's rhythmic editing at the top of his game, Beltrami's percussive bullet time goes eccentrically sideways in its mix of whistling spaghetti westernisms, jazzy gun-grabbing, explosive tangos, and a beyond operatic church shootout that makes for a very different, often smile-targeting killer that shows John Woo's flash to be as youthful as ever, one that energizes the creative synergy he started with Marco Beltrami and ZACH Steinberg to new flying heights. And now here to talk about creating a truly killer musical and visual symphony for a master of hyper-stylized action is the killer composer Marco Beltrami and editor ZACH Steinberg. Welcome to Film Music Live, everyone.
How are you doing?
Yeah. Well, it's great having you here. You know, before Silent Night, I think you both teamed up on a movie called American Night before even Silent Night came along.
Yeah, that's right. I was. It was an Italian film that wanted to be an international film, and it was. It was all shot in English with a U.S., British, European, English-speaking cast, and I was asked to do a little film doctor job on it, which turned into a very long 8 months of ground up recut. And I had met Marco years ago when he came in to meet. I was working with Andrew Niccol on a movie called Good Kill, which I love a lot. And Marco wanted to do it. We wanted Marco, but schedules just didn't work out. But I remember Marco very well from it. And then when I was talking with the producer of of Silent Night, and she was throwing around some names, one of the names that she mentioned to me was Marco, and I said, let's try and get this guy.
That's right. That was during COVID time. I remember. So we met over your place, Zach. We weren't all the logistics of that were all screwy because we couldn't have musicians in the same room. It was such a crazy time, but it was a lot of fun, and I think this was the point that I realized that, you know, working with Zach is really inspiring because he's suggesting things that he likes and all, and I can riff off that, and I don't know. I think we have developed a great chemistry. It's really it makes the job really fun to have someone that you're totally in sync with. And when Zach says something, it means something to me in a way that I feel connected, which isn't always the case because music, as you know, is an abstract language and it's sometimes hard to discuss.
Now, before
Yeah.
you both first teamed up with John on Silent Night, what were your impressions of John Woo, even just going into this? Or a John Woo
Well,
movie? What is a John Woo film?
right. I met John first on Silent Night, and I met him. I was actually hired into the shooting. I wasn't typically. I'm hired before they start shooting. Silent Night was a pretty low budget movie. John wanted an editor of a certain ability, so he wasn't settling, and he met with me. We actually had a Zoom meeting. He was already in Mexico City on the Zoom, and we talked for about an hour. The producers told me it was the longest they'd ever seen him talk to anybody. And John's English is good, but it's not what I would call. He's not extremely. He doesn't rattle on in English. He's very, very smart man, and he understands everything that we're talking about. But what's nice for me with John, and ultimately I think Marco talk about this too, is John speaks. I don't mean to sound too rhapsodical here, but he speaks movies. He really understands movies. His references are all movies, and he and I quickly discovered that we had a lot of common references, which I think that also applies to Marco too. So it's not a relationship that's full of conversation, typical conversation, verbal conversation, but there's a lot of understanding behind everything that gets said.
Yeah, that's true. And it's when he references movies, it opens up a new world rather than saying, I want this instrument or that instrument, or talking very specifically, by telling us or telling me, in my case, what was inspiring to him when he was making the movie, and what movies and even what scores were inspiring to him. That totally sets up a vibe for me of what he is going for in terms of the orchestration and the harmonic language and the whether how melodic it is and all this stuff. It's really a great way of describing what it is that he's going after. And as Zach says, he's not wordy, so he communicates things and will let you know whether it's whether what you're doing is what he's thinking of or not.
Yeah, and obviously, the big challenge of Silent Night is that there's no dialogue, and obviously the music has to play such a huge part of that film. What was it like dealing with the challenge of that, Marco and Zach?
Oh, by the way, he didn't. I saw in your promo, you said he directed Gemini Man. I don't think that's his movie, but yeah,
that's my bad, and I will be shot with a dove.
Yeah. Don't saddle him with that.
Okay. I will.
Yeah.
Mea culpa.
Yeah. So, I mean, so I came. Zach called me when he was working on Silent Night. I think there was a full assembly together. Well, actually, no. They had some ending stuff to shoot in Mexico still, but it was it was definitely enough to get a feel for the emotional sense of what the movie is and what it needs to do. And yeah, I forget. But Zach, do you remember what my direction was?
Well, I really wanted Marco to do it because I thought he'd be great for it. But it was, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Marco. But I mentioned before when I met John, it took him a little longer to hire an editor. I agreed to do it for a somewhat reduced rate, and I had to explain that to Marco. But when he saw the movie, he was willing to do it too because we both responded to the movie. And basically, I mean, as I was editing the movie, it's obvious that the score is going to be an incredibly serious and integral part of how we're telling the story. Um, and we have a combination of score and source. I some it's funny. Of this on Silent Night, I did a fairly complete temp. We didn't have a music editor doing a temp edit on it. I did it with my assistants. On The Killer, I did very little temping because we started, and I want to talk about that in a minute more. But I started working with Marco even when they were shooting. As soon as I had scenes put together. So on Silent Night, I was very careful. I kept the temp down to 2 different composers and about 3 different scores because I wanted to keep it fluid consistently through the movie. And we had a lot of source music as well. But I was really careful, and John and I both said this. I said to Marco, the temp is only a guide. It's not, we don't want to copy the temp. It's just to get and I think the final score is quite different from the temp, but the temp did manage to, it was good for spotting was the biggest thing I think it was good for. And just for general, how somber things were, how quick paced things were, stuff like that.
Yeah, it was good. And I remember it rings a bell. We talked in the first meeting about the music score doing 2 main objectives to the film, and one was the main character. I forget his name, but
Godluck,
yeah, his obsession, and if there was a way for the music to somehow convey his obsession, almost like something ringing in his head, and the other being the feeling of loss, this emotion that he carries with him. And so one is obsessive and can turn into like a very driving theme, and the other is a more melodic thing, and integrating those 2 things. And so those are what I worked on. I think the first scene was when he gets shot in the beginning, and this element of this obsession starts taking hold even when he's in the hospital there in the beginning. So and so musically it's very simple. It's basically just these 2 ideas that develop throughout the film.
Well, I think, it's safe to say in The Killer, there are a lot of ideas in that score. It is absolutely an insane, fun movie. It's not your grandpa's Killer. It's just like a real kind of fun, much lighter rethink of, the movie that really put, John on the map. And again, a big thanks to Backlot Records for providing us with 5 downloads of The Killer today. I guess the question is, obviously, I imagine you both saw the original film before you did this, maybe. Were you just struck by how much more fun this was, and the kind of fun that allowed you to really go for it?
Yeah, I mean, it did. Again, we starting off, John had some references, some cinematic references that he was inspired by in making this movie, and that's where I started. And as Zach was saying before, just started to say, there was a real, the whole way this process unfolded was, it was almost a luxury, because you don't get to do this often in movies, where you start on the project so early and you start working together and you sort of create this world together, rather than being constricted to like a period of, whatever, 5-6 weeks to score a movie. Zach, what were we were on this for how long together?
Well, this is a really long time, because in addition to the normal schedule of a movie, we had the SAG strike in the middle. So I would say from the time I first started giving you stuff, Marco, till the very end was probably about 15 months.
Yeah.
And it was a great example of how, Marco and I have been able to sort of build our relationship, mutual confidence. And, I felt very comfortable bringing him to John Woo on Silent Night. And then, so on The Killer, I was showing John scenes while they were shooting. I got the scene to a certain point. I said, if you don't mind, John, let me turn this over to Marco now and start working, getting some music. And he said, great, you guys just work it out and show me what you got. He didn't insist on spotting it with Marco first. He had a lot of trust in Marco and I that had developed from working in a similar way on Silent Night. So Marco started, for example, one of my favorite cues in the movie, the first scene I gave to Marco, as I recall, was a big, I don't know how many of your viewers have seen the movie yet, but there's a big hospital shootout that goes all through a hospital and ends up with Natalie and Omar back to back, holding off the bad guys in a lab. and that was the first. Remember that? I think it was the first bit I gave you. It's about a 10 or 12 minute scene.
Yeah.
It's got so much stuff in it, and it's still, I think, to this day, is many people's favorite scene in the movie when they see it.
Yeah, it's really a fun scene. I mean, it covers such ground, and it was a chance to develop a theme for the two of them, because they have such great chemistry in the movie.
Right.
Or Natalie, that so and also to develop what the things that John had talked about, and see if any of that stuff was clicking for him. And so it was like a perfect scene for that. So so that's where it began.
Yeah, and I just love that the hospital thing is also a shout out to Hard Boiled. We've got our first question from Louis Versalini. Marco, I really enjoyed your Killer score. The opening theme cue is great. It almost sounds like a tribute to a spaghetti western. It's a recurring theme and it appears several times. Can you talk about that theme? And this question goes, I guess, to both of you.
Well, yeah. So I assume that talking about this whistling theme that we have in the beginning starts the movie out, and so we had I had developed a theme for Natalie's character Z as a killer, and that's the theme that we were talking about that plays in the morgue scene. But we also needed something because she has this internal this loneliness, this longing for another life, something else, and how do we do that, and what would be the instrument for that? And I don't know how the whistling came to me, but somehow after seeing, for some reason, we went to a screening of The Samurai, which was a movie that John liked a lot, and I remember feeling somehow connected with that, maybe because it was French or what, I don't know, but I had this idea of writing a theme using someone whistling, and so I worked on it. We found somebody, this amazing whistler, and sent it to Zach, and I think Zach probably played it for John, and they both seemed to like it. I think that's how the process worked, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good example of how the whole process worked, because when we first scored, I should say, because we never did a temp. Basically, Marco created the temps for us, and what we were able to do is work with that and keep refining it, seeing how it worked in the whole movie, putting it all together. Anyway, as I recall, Marco, the first pass you did on the opening of the movie with Natalie in the church had a big saxophone idea in it, and we loved the saxophone. John and I both loved it, but we kind of recognized that it wasn't exactly working the way we wanted it to work for the movie, where it was maybe a little bit too much of a downer in the beginning. It was a little, and we thought we could really use it better and later on in the movie, which we ended up. There's a lot of sax in the movie. It's a great instrument. So, Marco and I and John, we talked about that. And I remember one day you just called me and said, I had this crazy idea. I want to just play it for you. If you hate it, it's okay.
Yeah,
As soon as I heard it, I loved it. And John loved it too. And John and I are both, in the movies we talk about it a lot. We talk about Morricone a lot. We love Morricone.
yeah.
There's a movie that John loves called The Professional, which I love too, with Jean Paul Belmondo, the early Professional, and its principal piece of music is a piece of Morricone. It's a Morricone piece called Chi Mai, which Morricone actually wrote for even an earlier movie that they licensed in The Professional. Anyway, but so Morricone
it was a good sign. It was an important sign when one of the characters in the movie her name is Chi Mai. So I mean that was
exactly.
It's like
the assassin who gets killed in the end is called Chi Mai.
Yeah. Wow. Don't grow your hair long. That's the lesson I took from that. Now, here's I also, when we talk about Ennio Morricone, we have to think about his amazing work for Dario Argento on Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Cat o' Nine Tails, which brings us to my second question from Ivan Sorkin of the Bond music. I had a feeling that the Z theme is some kind of tribute to Italian giallo detective movies. Lyrical tunes and vocalism, and the rest of the music sounds more contemporary. Was that your idea or John's idea, or was it just something that John was presented with, basically?
It was inspired by talking with John and Zach about what they were looking for, and then I sort of just ran with it. But yeah, I guess that's a big source of admiration for John. He loves that type of music.
Yeah, I think it also something Marco and I talked about a lot. We, along with John, love movies from that period. The 80s, basically, late 70s, 80s. The European cinema of that time, the French New Wave, everything going on in Italy with Morricone, just great stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things that is cool about it is that the music is always, it's not like that polished, Hollywood sound that you have now, where it's a little rough around the edges you can have, and so that's something we were going for too, that we didn't want like a giant orchestra for this. We wanted something smaller. We wanted to use for instance, a drum kit as opposed to like, just studio percussionists to carry some of that intensity into some of the cues, and not rely so much on electronic stuff, which is much more modern, but really everything was an acoustical instrument and an acoustical source. So that was another part of the score.
Yeah,
that reminds me. Go ahead, Jan. Do you want to say something?
Oh no, it was another question, but you were saying, Zach. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's just what Marco was just saying. Kind of reminds me of what really became a mandate, I think, for us doing the movie in general, and that really affected Marco, which is John is the kind of director. He doesn't do subtle emotions. I like to say he wears his heart on his sleeve, and everything is kind of a little extra big. It's really full of life, and it's right out there. And I remember talking to Marco about this, that the music should never be background music. If we're hearing music, it should be making a big statement. It should be saying something. It can be a little over the top, even if it has to. We never want to feel it's a caricature or a cartoon, but in the way that John's movies are sometimes a little over the top. And I think Marco really got that, and so it really enhances John Woo's style.
Yeah, his movies are there. I've heard people talk about it as being like, balletic, ballet violence, and I think the way he approaches these scenes is so artistic. It's like a dance, and the fact that we can actually write melodic music for these scenes, which enhances that element of it is, I think, is really rare in a modern action movie, and I think that's one of the things that he's such a master at. Which for being a musician, it's like it's like a dream come true to be able to score this stuff.
No, I
I
think
think in terms, just to wrap it up, I think in terms of really tying it into John and mine and Marco's appreciation for Morricone, when you watch a Morricone movie, whether it's the Leone series Once Upon a Time in the West, or whether it's 1900 Bertolucci, which was a phenomenal score. The music is so front and present. It's telling the story so unabashedly. It's not tucked behind anything. And that was really the mandate we gave Marco, and he just ran with it, which was great. I love that.
Send me more of those mandates. I'm yeah. I mean, honestly, the movie ended, and it was almost a little depressing because is there like some weird static?
Yeah, it's coming from the mic. It's either that or Sam Worthington. I don't know. Someone's gonna like come in. I don't know. It's kind of wacky. But anyways, I apologize, Marco. You were saying?
Oh no, it's just it was such a fun experience working collaboratively with. I mean, we would go in for meetings at Fox. And sit there with Zach and John and talk, and it was great. I really missed that because we work in a dark room like this all the time, and it's great to have that collaborative feeling like the movie should be at their best, but it's just unfortunately not that often.
Yeah.
My experience with John is he tends to find people he trusts and give them a little bit of leeway, give them a nice bit of leash, not micromanage. And so as a result, the whole process is very, very collaborative. It's really great.
I think the score sounds great. I think the score sounds great. And it brings us to a question from Jake Wright. What was it like recording at Abbey Road Studios for The Killer?
Well, I mean, that's a amazing place. I've done a few scores there now over the years, and I like recording in LA too. But Abbey Road is a purpose-built studio. All the rooms there for recording, where many of the stages in town here they're converted sound stages, and there's something about the rooms where they have this depth and warmth and detail that is really unique. And I mean, it's really an amazing place to work.
Ticket, you've been to Abbey Road.
I'd never been there. Marco and I joked about me going, but I would have loved to have gone, but we were doing lots of other things on the movie at the same time, already pre-mixing and doing ADR and whatnot. But this is probably a really good time to talk about our music editor, Joey Rand, who he did go, and he really did a fantastic job working with myself and Marco on the movie.
I'm so glad you introduced me to him, Zach, because he's amazing. And this whole, he has such knowledge of movies, and especially this time period of movies too, that we all seemed very much in sync right from the get-go.
Right. I had worked with Joey on several movies in the past, including The Matrix, all the Matrix movies. And I had this real instinctive feeling that Marco didn't have a particular music editor at the moment. So I had this strong instinct that he and Joey would click, and they did. And I was going to say, we were in a rush at one point. We had our first and only public preview of the movie, and the whole end Reel 7, which is the big end fight in the church. Marco had written a few things for it, kind of made a pass through it, but I mean, by his own, he wouldn't have wanted. I remember, Marco, you told me I don't want to use that yet. It's not ready to use.
Yeah.
So Joey went through with the whole movie and kind of cobbled together a Marco score based on other stuff. Marco heard some of it, riffed off it, rewrote it, and we ended up basically with the church cue we have now. I don't think we would have quite had that if Joey hadn't made that first pass.
No, I'd still be here working on that 30-minute long. Not only that, but he also, he had great ideas so after we had the whistling, the whistler, then it seemed like a natural. The melody seemed like a natural thing to expand into a song. So I worked on. I think you were away shooting in back in Paris, and I started.
Yes.
I ran out of cues to do, so I idle time. I started working on this song idea, and I sent it, and John and Zach liked it, but
I
Joey,
loved it when I heard it. It was so great.
Yeah, then Joey was the one that said, "Oh, let me try this for a few places in the movie," and things I wouldn't have thought of because I only thought of it as like an end credit thing. But for instance, that scene where Z has the van and with the heroine at the end, and she says, "Well, I hope I'm not spoiling the movie," but
right.
And then she says, "She says, I got your van," and it's like the perfect time to kick in to that theme there. So, arranged as the song. So it's he really has a keen sense and really suggested a lot of things that ended up being the way to score it.
Now, Pranav has a question. What is your approach towards cues? Do you like to do mock-ups first or directly record the instruments? And how do you manage to save time to get it all to the dub stage? I guess that could, maybe parts of it could go to both of you.
Well, I mean, we do mock-ups. There's certain things that I needed to hire some people in order to show. Like, for instance, there's no real way to mock up the whistling, I don't think, unless we hired someone to actually show Zach and John what it would sound like. I think if you
It's a very hard instrument. The saxophone is a really hard instrument to synthesize.
Saxophone too, yeah. It sounds kind of chintzy samples that we have, especially for some more like improvisatory stuff that we used in it. But yeah, I did. We had mock-ups in the first test screening. Was all mock-ups.
Right. With a certain amount of live stuff in there, like you're saying, like live saxophone, live whistling,
live drums.
One of the little right early on in the movie, a cue that I just have so much fun with when I heard it the first time I live in the movie is when Omar is chasing Coco, the guy in the car accident, the guy he shoots in the car. He's chasing through the streets, and you go into this wild. It's like a drum-based cue, and I think the drumming was live even in the mock-up because that's so improvisational and so jazz riffed, that I think it.
I used.
You couldn't really.
I try to make things family affairs now. My kids are getting older and they're good musicians, and I used my son Hayden played some drums in Silent Night, and
oh, cool.
It was a little bit pulling teeth because he's at that age where he's too busy for me. But I grabbed him and I said, "Sit down here. You got to play drums." And and so he played throughout that Coco chase scene, and it has a really fun energy to it, I think.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Now, here's a question from Peter Roos, and I guess this could apply to both of you. Do you typically work with locked edits, or is everything fluid these days?
I think it's pretty fluid.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Marco?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the edit is locked till after it comes out in the theater, right?
It's certainly not locked until the last week of the final mix.
Yeah.
Although I got to say, with certain directors, it's more locked. And with John, we stay more locked. I mean, like I mentioned before, the first scene I gave to Marco was the big hospital chase. that got tweaked, but that's essentially the same scene as I gave you, Marco. I think
Yeah.
I mean, but I mean, it's a little better. It's a little tighter.
Yeah,
When
things got
John saw it,
trimmed. Things got
he shot
trimmed.
a few new pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, there wasn't like any major reconstructions of anything. It was,
That's right.
yeah,
And I think that really applies to the whole movie. There was what you just said. There's never any major reconstructions. I mean, it's pretty true to the first cut of the movie, at least in the spirit. It mostly got shorter, but it got shorter just by tightening stuff, not by eliminating stuff wholesale. There's like one or two scenes, very small scenes, that are eliminated from the movie.
Now, Marco, Dale's got a question for you. What are some of the percussion instruments, especially the microtonal-ish metallic sounds heard in the killer's kick-ass mass?
oh, what is that? That's some stuff we recorded a while ago. Like what we do, sometimes we record things for something and we never end up using it. So we have stuff in Buck's computer mainly and on hard drives of sounds that we really like that we've never used. And that falls into that category. And I don't know what they're called, what the instruments, the percussion stuff is, but we recorded it, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago. I don't know exactly what it's from, but we worked with it. We manipulated it. It's definitely been processed a little bit. And that's a question for Buck. We'll have to get back to you on that.
You know, one thing that really hit me about the score is that, in a way, it starts out as a tango, but at the ending, it ends up like a symphony, essentially, in that church.
In the last
in the church by the time you get to the church, because again you've got all these kind of fun tangos, but by the ending, when she's upside down and doing the whole bullet thing, it really becomes like a symphony at that point. So there's kind of like a whole progression through music in the score. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Well, I mean, we have to go somewhere with it. It couldn't stay static. It had to feel like it was moving. After you're in level 10, where do you go?
I mean, basically, just movie-wise, between the cemetery and the church, which are really one big scene. The action starts in the cemetery, goes and then follows into the church. You're talking at least 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes. I don't remember the final time on that, but it's a climax of the movie. It's like, so like Marco said, it can't stay on one level the whole time. It's got to have a lot of movement. And that goes back a little bit to where I said we got so much help from Joey on that. He did a lot of editing of Marco's material.
To give us a shape. Yeah, he gave us a shape. Which was really helpful.
Right.
Yeah. Were you ever considered? I mean, I just love it when the sax kicks in out of nowhere, and it's just like, what am I listening? What am I watching? And it's just part of this kind of absurdist fun that comes with John Woo, even when he's being serious. But here, he kind of isn't. Were you ever worried, okay, this is too far, maybe this is a little too funny for what this is, or just the sky's the limit?
I mean, I didn't think of it as being funny. I think it was, it was sort of going, without abandon, sort of a way to, I don't know, did it strike you as funny, Zach?
Not at all. I mean, but it struck me as I recognized a little bit of a risk in there, but I think the best art comes with risk. And if the people who are making the art, let's call it, believe in it and are happy taking the risk, I think it's a good bet to try it. And I always felt with this movie, John didn't want to repeat himself. He was always a little worried about that from the original Killers. That's why it has such a different kind of a shape. It's more of a reimagining than a remaking. It's not a remake, it's a reimagination. And I always felt this whole movie, one of the things we got into in the editing room, to totally develop the editing room, was all the extensive use of split screens. And I don't mean to once again get too up my own butt here, but I feel like this comes from John Woo, but I feel like the whole movie functions almost like a really cool jazz piece. And I think the music totally supports that. It's riffing on things, and it's playing with things, and it's going off in a leap, and it comes back, and I love it. I just love it.
Yeah, no, it's just for me, it's just a tremendous amount of fun. I mean, Marco, you certainly have a history with France. I just love the French setting of this film. You've scored a bunch of French movies. You scored this amazing French 2-part crime epic called Mesrine, which is one of my favorite things you've ever done. What is just for both of you, what does France bring to your creative process here?
Well, one of the things I love about working, in the past for French directors and is that there's a sense of respect for the director and the process, which is probably a little more pronounced than we have here in the States, where it's often the studios that have the final cut. And what it means is it's a little bit more of a conservative industry in certain respects. And not to say it always works, but I think, as Zach was saying, this sort of trying to achieve something artistic is very difficult to do by committee. It's something that filmmaking is collaborative, and it should be collaborative among creative people. And I think that's one of the main reasons I really like working with French inspired stuff.
And to me, knowing John, I know how much the French New Wave means to him. And we deliberately, the movie has, the movie has a deliberateness that I think you find in those movies, whether it's Jean-Pierre Melville or Jean-Luc Godard. And somehow, to me, the setting, I know it inspired John, and it inspired me.
Zach, I think, you've cut so many great sequences for so many, directors. The one thing that hits me when I think about your sequences is rhythm. You just get such a great sense of rhythm from your cutting. I mean, Marco, in that respect, can you tell as a composer when an editor is being musical?
Yeah, you can tell. It's an interesting thing, because when you're working on a piece of music and you find something that feels like the pacing of the scene or the rhythm of the scene, you'll notice that things line up pretty well. Like, you don't have to do much adding extra beats or doing little tempo changes and all that. You can sort of play the scene, and it holds together. So that's like one very evident thing. But I think more importantly, it's something that just innately holds your attention and draws you in. And that's something that Zach is a master at. He's the best.
Thanks, Marco. I'll just say, for the benefit of people who might be interested in this in the audience, it's a long-standing practice of mine. I do not cut to music. I think, and I kind of learned a lot about this from George Miller. I was an assistant editor on a George Miller film. And George liked to come in once a week, turn the sound off, and watch the cuts. And when you do that, you find that musicality that you're talking about. And there should be it's a long rest, and then when I turn the movie over to Marco, he just makes it that much better.
It's interesting that you say that, because it's like people ask about composing and do you compose at a piano or how do you do it? And I think it's in the same way, like having temp music almost can limit what you're doing because you're bound by the beats that are inherent in the piece you're using. Same too with I think it's similar to like composing at a piano, for instance, like, because then you're inherently thinking piano music as opposed to just letting your imagination develop the music. So it's interesting. I think it's similar in a way.
Now we've got a question from CDT Cobra. Marco, how was it to get to work again with the French-Canadian singer-cellist Joanne so many years after I Am Dinah? Great score there, too.
Yeah.
Good question.
I mean, she's amazing. She has one of those voices that is it's just so incredible. Yeah, I met her. God, it was such a long time ago. And I've been trying so long to use her on something. And, you know, it was, I love her. And she's such an amazing musician. Her musicality, her phrasing, her voice, it's just, yeah, it was really nice. I wish she could have come for the premiere so I could have seen her in person again. But maybe she might be coming on tour to LA sometime soon.
Yeah.
I'd like to meet her too. Yeah. She did a wonderful job. She really did a wonderful job. I was so impressed.
Yeah.
Now here's a question for you, Zach. You know, you hear the term of cutting in camera, directors who basically just edit in camera. And I imagine you've been on films where some movies are a lot harder to edit than other movies.
I've never met him. I've never met him or her. But go ahead and finish your question.
Oh, I apologize. With that in mind, how easy is John to cut? I mean, do you just like sense that John is a director who himself is really musical, obviously, in the way he stages his stuff? Is this stuff, okay, here's the cut point, you know, I just know exactly what I'm doing, or is there a lot more work there?
There's plenty of work there, but John is inherently very, very cinematic, and his material is. This is a hard thing to exactly define, but there's certain directors whose material is highly cuttable. I mean, I've worked on movies where after a lot of effort, I get it put together, but it's like a house of cards. And you can't do much with it after that. You know, you don't want to do much with it because it's all going to come apart. With John, I can do we can talk about the scene and make pretty major shifts in it because he's always moving the camera. He's very open to me doing post-production moves in the editing room, like move-ins, pans, blow-ups, all the split screens we did, things like that. So he just thinks cinematically. My favorite directors would be people like George Miller or Steven Spielberg or Peter Weir. They think cinematically, and John is one of those. And these guys' material is very cuttable.
Now, I guess we're going to be sending you guys out soon, but you know, when you just look at this really fun work, you know, I think really between, you know, the composing and the editing, there's just a real synergy going on here. And I would love to see you guys team up with Marco again. But I guess my send out question is, what do you think makes for an enduring collaboration between composers and editors? And what do you think you've learned from each other? What do you think you should learn from each other?
I think it's just being on the same page. You know, it's just I look forward to the next time I get to work with Marco because I know it'll be a success, and you know, you just feel like it's all going to work out. Unfortunately, when that decision gets made of who gets hired, you also have directors and producers and studios. So Marco and I can't always control it. But as much as I could control it, I would love to repeat.
Yeah, I think it's this sense of adventure. You're going on an adventure together, and it's like it's becomes a fun adventure. And I think you do your best work when you're having fun.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, it's like if you love taking, if you've got a buddy who you like hanging out with and driving in the car for long distances, and someone says road trip, you say, "I'm in."
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where you're going. It's just going to be a fun road trip.
Yeah, because then it's like the spirit of adventure and innovation and creativity and collaboration becomes that's and so having that synergy, being able to, music is abstract, being able to connect and understand intuitively what someone's saying or what their references are, what they're, I think that's all that stuff is important. It's not like trying to fight against it.
Well, at the least, I look forward to having you both team up for Road Trip 2. Marco and Zach, I just want to thank you both so much for joining us at Film Music Live. Everyone watch The Killer. It's a total blast. It's on Peacock with Marco's score is available on Backlot Music. And a special thanks to Backlot's Nikki Walsh and Ken Yu for today's promos, our show producer Dale Turner, executive producer Mark Northam, and graphic designer Mark Banning. I'll see you all on the next Film Music Live.